Fresh Start by Bobby Dangerously. I need to get rid of all these old clothes and things. I can't keep this stuff around anymore. My apartment is a mess. I can't live like this. I have a new girlfriend and I need a fresh start. A new life. I really like Vicky and I can't fail, as I had with the other last girlfriends. Those girls just didn't work out. So my new girlfriend Vicky is coming over tomorrow for the first time. I'm getting really excited. We have been out with each other a few times, but she has never been over here before. I need to cleanse this place, tidy it up. I want to make a good impression. So I box up all these old clothes that are lying around. I box up some other mementos, photos of my ex-girlfriends. I can't keep them around anymore. I take a couple boxes down to the alleyway behind the apartment and toss them in a metal garbage can and burn them. It's a cleansing thing. Burn away old problems and such. At least that's what they say. It actually felt good doing that, watching my past burn away. Actually, a great lifting feeling. The next day at 5 p.m., I leave for a walk to go to Vicky's place and pick her up. She only lives a few blocks away, which is exciting to me. As I walk down my street, there is a big corner lot that used to have a grocery store that was ran by some farmers from the nearby countryside. They sold a lot of produce grown locally at the store, as well as other foods, of course. But a tragedy happened. Someone burned down the store. Now it's a big empty lot on the corner of my block with tall grass and weeds. A big, unkept lot. Every time I walk past the lot, I always feel something odd, like it has a presence, something weird that makes my skin crawl. I know no one was killed in the fire, so I don't believe it's haunted or anything like that. I just have a feeling that something isn't right there, so I usually cross the street before I pass it, but Vicky's apartment is on the same side of the street. I'll just walk past it instead of crossing the street and make the trip longer than it has to be. The feelings are probably just my imagination anyways. As I walk past the corner lot, I see all the tall grass and weeds are growing out of control. I also notice 9 wooden poles sporadically placed in the lot. I wonder what they are for. It's strange to see them even there. Wooden poles with cross arms. Is this some religious ceremony that's being planned or something just weird? I don't know. I don't care. I want to go see Vicky. That's what I care about. As I get to Vicky's apartment, I see she's waiting outside. I haven't been up to her apartment yet either. It would have been nice to see it, but maybe I will someday. Maybe if all goes right. I walked up to her and we hugged and said our hellos. We turned and started back to my apartment. The sun is going down now, and it's now twilight. We reached the empty lot of my block, and Vicky says,
"How neat! Look at all of the scarecrows."
I couldn't believe it. They weren't there when I walked by earlier. 9 scarecrows.
Come on, let's go up to them and look at them.
I said it wasn't a good idea, as they were not there 30 minutes ago.
Come on, I want to take a look.
I said okay. We stepped off the sidewalk and onto the grass of the big lot, our feet swishing in the weeds and grass. Walk up to the closest scarecrow and look up at it. At that moment, I noticed the sun is now down and it is dark out. The scarecrows are now harder to see, as the only light is on the corner, the light from the street lamp.
Wow, these scarecrows are very neat. Come on.
I walked in deeper into the lot. We are now in the middle of the 9 scarecrows. I do notice something a little unnerving, something familiar and strange about these scarecrows. At that moment, one of the scarecrows moved his head slightly and looked right at me. I didn't believe what I saw. I think it was in my imagination. Then I hear Vicky scream. She screamed really loud. I looked towards her, and she was down a little ways by one of the other scarecrows. I didn't realize we separated. I see that one of the scarecrows has dropped off the pole it was on, and is now standing and holding Vicky. I started to panic. I didn't know what to do. This lot feels like a trap. It has that otherworldly feeling again. This has to be my imagination. Vicky then has her mouth covered by the scarecrow's hand to silence her. I start to notice more of the scarecrows are dropping from their poles and walking towards Vicky, surrounding her. I can't save her now. She's trapped. I look at Vicky and notice the frightened look in her eyes. It looks like the scarecrows are whispering to her. I can hear a little of that. The one removes its hand from her mouth. She doesn't scream anymore, which I think she must be completely out of her mind of fright. As I keep looking, I notice something peculiar. Something I thought of earlier, but now I feel I was correct. So I turn towards the alleyway, as I'm closer to that than the sidewalk. I ran past one of the scarecrows and knocked it down. Phew, I got away. As I enter the alleyway, I run as fast as I can. My apartment is towards the end of the other side of the block, so I keep running. All of a sudden, I see in front of me, in the lamp-lit alleyway, 5 of the scarecrows. I stop and slide on the loose gravel. I turn to run on the other way, and I see the other 4 scarecrows coming my way. I also see Vicky with them. I look back and forth and the scarecrows are closing in on me. How did they get around me like this? I'm deep into the alleyway and I have no escape. What do? I have to think. I do have matches in my pocket. Maybe I can burn them. That seems to work in the movies. I look around. I see loose newspaper, a couple of rags and some sticks lying on the alleyway ground. I wrap the newspaper and rags around the sticks and light them with the match. The makeshift torch ignites. Now I have some kind of protection. The scarecrows are now even closer. My heart is pounding so hard, I can feel and hear it in my ears. I'm looking back and forth, to my right and left. I'm breathing heavy. I want to scream. The torch cuts out some of the chill from the night air. As I'm looking to my left and looking at Vicky, the scarecrow on my right snuck up and grabbed me by the arm. I was so scared I dropped the torch. Then the other scarecrows surrounded me quickly. They all grabbed me and held me in place. Vicky walked up to me and looked at me in the eye. I stared back, scared. She said,
So you are the one that has been killing the young women in the neighborhood. You are the killer of these 9 women. They saved me from you, and I will help get their revenge.
I look and I see all the scarecrows are indeed wearing the clothes that I burned yesterday, that I had lying around in my apartment, the clothes of the women I killed, my so-called ex-girlfriends. Vicky picked up the dropped torch and touched it to my clothes, and I was alight. As I burned, I screamed horrifically, but no one can hear my screaming. After I burned and passed out, I woke and see it's now daylight. I am tied to the pole in the empty corner lot, the lot where the scarecrows of my 9 victims were. I am dressed in all of the clothes of the women I killed. I am now a scarecrow. My soul forever in these clothes and tied to this place. On my neck hangs a sign. It says, "In honor of the fallen. Do not remove. City landmark." I'm sure the town will think it's for the grocery store, but no, it's for my victims. My punishment.
Jed by the Prowler. There once was a farmer named Nathan. He lived alone and lived a modest life. Day in and day out he toiled his fields and tended to his cows. But there was something missing. Nathan was lonely. Just a friend. All I need is a friend, he would say out loud as he looked up to the sky. But no one would be his friend. He tried to befriend the delivery man. He tried to befriend the shopkeepers when he delivered his crops. But nothing. No one wanted to be his friend. As a matter of fact, they were rude to him. So one day Nathan decided to make his own friend. He made a scarecrow and called him Jed. The lonely farmer took Jed everywhere. No matter what Nathan did, Jed was right beside him. Whether it was milking the cows, to picking his crops, and even accompanied him on deliveries, Nathan would talk to Jed as if he was alive. He would ask his opinion. He would joke with him to pass the time, and even feed him through the mouth slit he gave him. And after Nathan's day was done, he would bring Jed inside with him and sit him by the fire to keep warm. Then he would go upstairs to go to bed, then wake up and start his day with Jed all over again. Nathan and his new friend were content and happy, inseparable in living their lives. Yes, people would now make fun of Nathan, especially the children in town, but the farmer did not care, for he had his friend, and he was happy. Everything was fine in the farmer's life until the day before Halloween. A group of the town's unsavory youths cornered Nathan on his farm and began to make fun of him. They wanted Jed, but he wouldn't give him up. The group then began to attack Nathan, punching and kicking him, all the while continuing to taunt him. One of the boys then brought Nathan up to his feet and punched him. The punch sent Nathan flying, and when he fell, he landed head first on a sharp corner of his tractor. Nathan laid there and bled to death. He could have been saved if one of the boys went to get help, but instead, they just stood there and continued to ridicule him. Jed saw the whole thing. Before leaving, the group took their anger out on Jed, throwing him to the ground, and began to kick and punch him. They tore his seams and ripped out his stuffing, laughing the whole time doing it. Even one boy urinating on Jed before the group finally left. The two friends were left lying in the field next to each other. Poor Nathan was dead. Well, through some strange cosmic magic in the universe, Jed was brought to life to seek his revenge. It was now the next day, Halloween. The same group of boys continued their tormenting ways, stealing candy from younger children, egging houses, destroying property, until Jed caught up with them late into the night. Halloween ended with Jed ripping them limb from limb, leaving each of their mangled corpses in their front yards like some ghoulish Halloween decoration. Nathan's body was finally found days later when he didn't show up for his deliveries. And as for Jed, he was found sitting inside by the fireplace, covered in blood. He had gotten his revenge. Revenge for his friend. Mr. Elroy's Scarecrows by the Prowler. The Elroy farm sat on the outskirts of town. There weren't too many homes out that way, just 3 neighboring farms and 2 standalone homes. Now the children who lived around there were always told not to step foot on Mr. Elroy's property. The young ones abided, but the older kids, the teenagers, were always messing around in his cornfield and tearing down his scarecrows. Mr. Elroy would chase them off with a pitchfork, calling them every name in the book. Every morning, he would go into town and deliver fresh corn from his fields, always complaining to the teenagers' parents about the mess they caused, and never having a kind word for anybody. As it got closer and closer to Halloween, people in town claimed Mr. Elroy was becoming more and more agitated by the day, but things reached its boiling point the day before Halloween. They say he blazed into town in his old pickup, screaming and hollering out of the window. He came to a screeching stop in front of the farmer's market, got out of his old busted pickup truck, and shouted and complained to any parent he could find. See, the night before, not only did the teenage children tear down his scarecrows, but they destroyed all of his Halloween decorations. He begged and pleaded for something to be done to these destructive teenagers, but their parents would just look at him and bullshit him. Yes, Mr. Elroy, we'll punish them. Or yes, Mr. Elroy, we'll ground them. But he knew it was just bullshit. He saw those kids out and about every day and night, walking past his farm. Mr. Elroy was done. He lost it at that very moment, on that very spot. He screamed at the top of his lungs for everyone to hear. If changes were not made, and if something wasn't done, he would take matters into his own hands. Now, sadly, no one must have believed Mr. Elroy, because his threats were not listened to. The parents, as usual, did not punish their children. Halloween was the next night. a Halloween that will be unforgettable to those who live there for the rest of their days and future generations. It's said that when Mr. Elroy returned home, he was still angry, but to calm his nerves, he put back up his Halloween decorations, making his farm look the most festive in the entire town. Then, put back together and erected his scarecrows. He worked all through the night, making sure his farm was ready for Halloween. As midday afternoon approached the next day, all the teenagers gathered after school and decided to dress up and go trick-or-treating, even though they were all too old to still be doing so. But it wasn't the candy they were after. Sure, it's nice to get free candy, they thought, but they were interested in more sinister pursuits. That evening, they all walked past Mr. Elroy, sitting on his porch, on their way home to get dressed up for the night. They stopped and looked at him. One of the boys yelled, "Hey, old man, we'll be back tonight, and you have a surprise coming to you." It is said that Mr. Elroy just sat there and grinned, grinning a wide, sinister smile from ear to ear. As it got dark, the group of teenagers gathered together. All but one showed. No one knows why that member of the group didn't show. Some say they had gotten sick. Others say they thought something bad might happen that night. Whatever the case, the rest of the group plotted their plans of cruel pranks and tricks for the night, from stealing younger kids' candy to egging people's houses and leaving bags of flaming shit on people's front porches. They say the group was horrible that Halloween, causing nothing but trouble in the neighborhood the whole night. The last time anyone officially saw them was about 10 o'clock, heading down the road towards Mr. Elroy's farm. Half past midnight, however, the teenagers' parents started to get worried. They searched the entire neighborhood, but found nothing. They went to the home of the teenage girl, who decided not to go, and asked her if she knew what they were doing that night. She said yes, and told them they were going to go down to Mr. Elroy's farm and really destroy the place, worse than ever before. When the parents heard that, they looked at each other in shock and utter dread, with the threats from Mr. Elroy playing through their heads. They rushed down the old dirt road and stopped in front of his farm. The whole house was lit, with dimly lit orange and purple lights strung up over the porch and roof. But just beyond the wood fence, one of the parents noticed a row of scarecrows, much more than he usually has, they thought. One of the parents shined a flashlight at the row of scarecrows. They looked bloodied, and the parents noticed that they were dressed very similar to what their children were wearing when they left. A few of the parents jumped the fence when they saw this. When they reached the row of scarecrows, they saw that they were completely covered in fresh blood. One of the fathers pulled the sack off one of the scarecrows' heads. Then a scream rang out from one of the mothers. It was her child. Then one by one, they took off the sacks, and each time revealed the next parent's child, all lined up in a row. There was a silence in the air from the shock and disbelief. The only thing that broke it was a maniacal laugh from the porch. It was Mr. Elroy. "How do you like it?" The display was rushed, but all in all, I think I did a pretty damn good job, if I do say so myself. I told you, if you didn't do something about those menacing kids, then I would handle them. myself. Scarecrow. My crops were dying, just like my hope of making a living out of them. The damn crows had been devouring them as if there was no tomorrow. Saying this, I couldn't guarantee that there would have been. There was no hope, no light. There was only despair. I decided to get a scarecrow after much persuasion. Honestly, I didn't think it would have such a huge impact on my life. During the first few days and weeks, they were growing and looked ever so fresh. Overwhelmed, I kept it there even when I didn't need it. I never used to believe in miracles, but that scarecrow changed everything. Eventually, it had brought me such good fortune that I had gained enough money to move places and afford an amazing private home. It had an indoor swimming pool, cinema, the works. One day, after living in my new house for a few months, I noticed cracks in the walls that hadn't been there before, mold growing out of nowhere, and leaks and puddles forming on the floor. I called plumbers, but they claimed to see no such thing. Certain that I was correct, I began to take pictures of the incidents, but nothing appeared in the photos, except one thing. In photos of my garden, there was the scarecrow that I had long left behind in my previous field. Curious, but slightly scared, I took more pictures. With each shot, I noticed that the scarecrow seemed to be coming closer. I never took my eye off the camera until the scarecrow filled the shot completely. Something's Wrong with the Corn by the Prowler. I pose a question for my fellow Halloween diehards out there that are thinking of traversing through a corn maze this season for a spooky activity. Can you trust it? I know I never have. Nature's most smuggest vegetable. I mean, think about it. It stands there all smug and erect, looking all high and mighty as it looks down on the rest of the vegetable world, with its green stalks wrapping it tightly and its bright yellow bumps glistening under the warmth of the sun. What's it thinking about? What's it plotting? Does it remember every corn on the cob you've ever had? Every chowder? Every bag of popcorn you've popped? And what about those cream corn nights? You've spent your life eating it. What if it's thinking about eating you? I've never liked it myself, going back to when I was a wee babe. Like I said, I've never trusted it, with its steamy taste and squishy texture, trying to chew on its tiny kernels, and there's no amount of butter that will hide that shit. Speaking of, how can you trust a food that refuses to digest? Days later, still showing up in the bottom of the toilet. What's it doing there? Trying to perform some bodily revolt before your insides finally say enough is enough and expelled before it can do damage. I loathe it with my entire being, so you may think I speak with a biased opinion on the subject. You may think I'm mad altogether. It's just a vegetable, you say, but I know I speak the truth. I've searched the annals of local histories of towns who have a heavy corn population, and the thing they all have in common throughout the years is the strange disappearances in the corn and even death. That's right, my friends. I have come across many stories where bodies have been found savagely torn apart, left strewn in the cornfields. Last Halloween cemented my beliefs when my fiancée showed me a picture she took with her phone while walking through a corn maze with her children. Just before she exited, she snapped a picture of a cornstalk standing there all smugly, and she noticed it had long flowing hair hanging from its opening, like pubic hair. How can you trust that? How can you trust a hairy vegetable? I was shocked. I was disgusted. Plus, how can you trust something a group of bloodthirsty religious children choose as their medium to hide in? You see, Stephen King knew. Animals know about the corn, insects, the crows. They all try and destroy it. They know something's wrong. Why don't we? I'll tell you what, we better figure it out before it's too late. They're out there, lined up in their rows, nestled in their fields, plotting and waiting. Scarecrows. Tom grunted, lifted the scarecrow off its pole, and tossed it alongside the compost pile. They used to last a lot longer, huh? Said his daughter Brittany. She idly poked at the scarecrow's straw-stuffed shirt with a little pink princess wand she recently been hauling around everywhere. They did, said Tom. You're too young to remember, though. I remember all the scarecrows, she said. Tom motioned for her to follow him, and together they started up the muddy trail to the pony barn. What's the first scarecrow you remember? He said. The one you dressed up to look like Mommy, she said. Tom pursed his lips and nodded his head. Yeah, you might remember that one, but you were very little. I always liked the ones you dressed up special, like the one you glued the wig onto, or the statue one, she said. The Venus de Milo, that was a good one. Messy, though. Tom slid open the barn stall door. A weeping brown burlap sack sat huddled in the corner. Please, said the sack. All right, you're getting old enough to help, said Tom. How should we decorate this one? The Scarecrow. I recently moved into an old farmhouse, and I was preparing my home for its first Halloween. Cobwebs on the bushes, plastic body parts hanging off my oak tree, and I was just putting the finishing touches to the blood splatter on my door. Since I was too old to be scared by this silly holiday, I reasoned that it was my turn to do the scaring instead. It was dark now, and I could barely make out the dark shapes in my neighbor's cornfield. To my shock, the old tattered scarecrow seemed to move, but stubbornly, I refused to move. It took irregular long strides with impossibly long legs and leapt over the wooden fence, heading straight for me. I tried to reason in my head what I must be seeing, but I lost my nerve and slammed the door shut. And I felt silly for a moment, nearly convincing myself that it was just some drunk playing a joke, until there was a loud, unsettling thump against my door, causing me to fall back to the floor. I crawled back slowly, feeling my heart pounding. From the door window, I could see his face slam against the glass, and he could see me with his wild, bloodshot eyes peeking from the holes in his burlap sack mask. I felt my blood run cold when the knob slowly starts to turn. Damn it. I forgot to lock the door. The collector's harvest. It was summertime, and for me that meant a whole 3 months with my father on the farm, helping him tend to chickens, the garden, and all the works. My parents were divorced, so during the school semester I would go live with my mom in the city, but during the summertime, when school let out, I would go visit my father on his farm, 3 hours away from my mom. Truth is, I didn't mind it much. I liked doing meaningful work on the farm and hoped to have my own one day. There were some neighbors around, though not much. Sometimes my friend Davidson, a boy about 3 years older than me, would come over and help us. Then we would spend what time we had left playing some card games or drinking. We were underage, but way the hell out here, that didn't matter much. Our farm was not big, but my father was the master of making the most with the least. We had a small chicken pen of about 7 chickens, a square-foot garden growing all sorts of vegetables and starches, and in the center of the farm was a scarecrow. I always asked my father about it. He just told me that it had been in his family for generations, almost 120 years. That thing belongs in a museum, I said jokingly, to which my father laughed and replied, "So do I, son. Now let's go get those goats tended to." Normally, a scarecrow wouldn't bring much attention, but something seemed different about this one. Other scarecrows are made out of straw and wore farmer attire. This one, on the other hand, wore a black cloak and was made out of dark wood branches. I put it out of my mind and did my chores around the farm. Life was pretty mundane: coffee in the morning, water through the day, and a bit of moonshine at night after a long day's work. Life continued to be this way throughout June until the very end of the month. Me and my dad walked outside to the farm and noticed the fog was heavier than usual. We walked out to the middle, only to see 3 of our chickens had made their way out of the pen and died around the scarecrow. I thought it was strange that all of them would have died in the exact same place. My father was not so shocked. Our chickens were pretty old after all. We cleaned up the chickens and then went about our normal routine. In the middle of the workday, my father said I could take the rest of the day off to hang out with Davidson while he went to town to get more chickens and more coffee. I didn't argue. I finished milking the goats and then took my deck of poker cards over to Davidson to play. He welcomed me in while his mother was baking a cherry pie in the oven, and it smelled delicious. "Hey, man, glad we could hang out today. Why did your father let you off early?" I told him about the chickens. "Damn, man, that's pretty crazy. Your father should be careful going into town. They say there is a murderer out there. Killed 2 women just last week." His mother spoke up from behind him. "Now, Dave, don't go scaring people like that. Stuff like that doesn't happen around here. Our homes were a good hour away from town, so we only ever went if we really needed something. And the idea of somebody driving an hour to some old farms just to kill people was crazy." Me and my friend finished our 3rd round of poker when my dad came back. "All right, man. I gotta go help my father. See you tomorrow," I said, walking out the door. As I walked to my father, he handed me a box of small baby chicks. "Here, Put these in the empty pen, he said as he grabbed the coffee from the back seat. That night I went to bed earlier than usual. The hard work plus the alcohol I sipped at Davidson's hit me. I woke up at about 3:15 a.m. to the sound of music. I made my way out of bed and went downstairs silently as to not wake my father. When I reached the back door and opened it, the fog had already begun to set in, and on the other side, I swear I saw something, or more, someone. On the bench we kept next to the garden, the one we sit down to take breaks on and gaze at the sunset meadows, was a man. He seemed to be wearing a black coat with a black hat and was playing a banjo in its deepest keys. The melody was a bit haunting, yet listening to it gave a nostalgic feeling. The fog got deeper, and I went back inside, and when I did, my father was waiting for me. "What are you doing out of bed?" he asked inquisitively. "There is a man outside on the bench." My father raced outside. The fog had now dissipated to a thin veil. Sure enough, there was no man on the seat. "You had a bad dream. Go back to bed." I obeyed his order and marched upstairs, kind of relieved that there was no one there. The next morning, we woke up and went outside, and sure enough, there was a fog. The fog did not drag as much attention as the Scarecrow, which now had the body of a goat next to it. My father walked over to it, looked at it with a bit of pity. He then looked at the Scarecrow and noticed something neither of us noticed when we walked out. The scythe we used to cut tall weeds and overgrowth made its way out of the lock shed and next to the Scarecrow. It was now covered in blood. My dad took the scythe, put it back into the shed, and then we disposed of the goat. On account of the rain and thunder, we didn't have to do much around the farm except feed the animals and spend the day listening to radio or watching a few videos my dad had for his old TV and VHS set. The whole day I couldn't stop thinking about the goat, the Scarecrow, or the man I thought I saw last night. The next few weeks were not eventful. It was life on the farm as normal for me, and summer was coming to an end. The end of August, my last week there, puzzles me to this day. I had woke up before my dad and turned on the radio to one of the only two stations we got. The news had come over the static. More reported murders. The voice was in and out because of the static, but I knew it was talking about the unsolved serial killer case over in town. My dad finally woke up. We sucked down coffee and looked out the window to see thick fog. I wondered if anything will be dead next to the Scarecrow. Me and my dad walked outside, and what I found disturbed me. It was a dead human. I did not know the man, but I looked at my dad, who seemed completely unfazed by what he was looking at. "Son, go tend to the animals and harvest the kale. I will take care of this." Once again, he took the scythe that was next to the Scarecrow, who I now believed was responsible for all of this. He put the scythe back into the shed and grabbed a shovel to bury the body. After a long day of going about my chores, I walked inside, took a small drink, and ate some apple pie before going off to bed. That night, I woke up at about 3:15 a.m., again to the sound of a banjo being played outside. I didn't go after him for fear my father would give me some choice words for disobeying him again. I sat and listened to the song until it slowly faded away into silence. That is when I fell asleep. The next 4 days were uneventful, but when I woke up on my last day at the farm, I went outside, not even drinking coffee, and saw my dad already outside where the Scarecrow used to be. The shed was open, and the scythe was gone completely. I asked my dad what had happened, and he gave me a direct yet vague response. The collector has gone out for his autumn harvest, but he will be back next spring. I went back in to have coffee, and I listened to the radio. No murders since the last one a week ago, a day before the dead man arrived on our property. Ode to Stoolzabub from the Prowler. Beware the chamber pots when they crack and creak. They start to bubble and squeak from the master of the one-cheek sneak. When the lord of the lump arrives, a watery tear he brings to your eyes. 1,000 colons you will surely smell from the hollowed-out anuses that are burning in hell. The demon of shite, Stoolzabub is his name, the master of ruin and nostril decay. When you start to feel weak from the smells of his reek, you'll know he is close. It's your soul that he seeks. Hide if you can, hide you must do. Run for forever from the Lord of the Pooh. I would like to give a heartfelt thank you to the special friends of the channel for your overwhelming generosity. If you would like to support the channel, the link is below in the description. Also, please send me your stories and poems to duchessofdarkness27@gmail.com. You can also find me on Instagram at duchess.ofdarkness and Twitter at duchessofdarkn2. I want to thank all my listeners for your kindness, your encouragement, and your support. It means the world to me. Thank you for joining me. Until next time.